Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne. Welcome to the Empowered Poly Podcast,
where we give you the tools to help you feel more empowered
in your polyamorous and consensually non-monogamous relationships,
sharing what we've learned as relationship coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Poly is LGBTQ+, alternative lifestyle, and kink friendly.
Thank you for joining us,
and enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 44, our interview with Nicole Thompson, who is a queer sex and relationship psychotherapist and the host of the Modern Anarchy Podcast. She's the author of the Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, Crafting Secure Non-Monogamous Relationships, and conducted the first published academic study on relationship anarchy. So cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Nicole is widely recognized as a leading theorist on non-monogamy and sexuality. Through her private client work, she has the pleasure practice and helps people liberate pleasure, navigate desire, and create deeply connected relationships rooted in authenticity and expansion. Oh,
I love my life.
Breathe.
It's a long journey to
your
get
life.
here, but I love it.
That's fantastic. I love that so much.
Yeah,
You're definitely a person I'm looking forward to getting to know.
absolutely.
So welcome to the podcast, or welcome to the show, or whatever we call this.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just jump right in. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so let's talk about the first question then. How did growing up in a fundamentalist religious environment shape your early views on sexuality and relationships?
Oof.
Big
Yeah.
question.
I told you I'm at my lover's lake house, right? Femme lover, right? I was completely anti-homosexuality growing up. I was the first person to stand up in class and be like, homosexuals are going to sinners, which is comical to get later in your life and discover, oh, wow, I was so passionate about this idea because actually I think I was suppressing so much. I can remember even back as young as third grade having like queer desires and fantasies, but having no cognitive framework to place that anywhere other than sin, shutdown, and repression. So first big thing, wow, to get out of that gate. And then also I remember my sex education. Have you heard of the paper test?
No.
The tape
No.
test
What is
that
it?
some people know of, but
Oh, I think
my
I've heard the
sex ed-
tape test, but yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, my sex education, which I don't even know if I want to give it that word, education. I would say the abstinence propaganda that I received was coming into chapel, and they had this person come up on stage, and they had a blue piece of paper and a pink piece of paper, and they put them together with glue and said, this is what happens when you have sex with someone. And then if you leave them, and the page was all ripped and broken, and they were like, who's going to want you after this?
Holy shit.
And yes, that's the correct response. At the time, I was wearing the purity ring that I still wear for now different reasons and reclamation, but I was like, yes, this is why I'm not having sex. This is why, And so like I was totally drinking the Kool-Aid. As a therapist now, I think about the, rates of trauma and all the other experiences that like to say a narrative like that is highly problematic and not at minimum trauma informed, but that's like the very beginning of my journey. Anti-queer, no masturbation, that's super sinful, even though I would do it and feel extreme guilt. And then, no sex before marriage. Otherwise, you would be broken, and who would want you?
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So how did that impact your relationships?
So I obviously was only dating men. I thought I was going to have kids by the time I was 20. I was planning to get married to the people that I was dating. It was a very like clear, the relationship escalator. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that. It was just a clear path on that. And so the first time I failed and had sex in a very committed, loving relationship, I sobbed in the bathroom uncontrollably because of literally that paper test. I was like, I failed. Who is ever going to want me? The one thing I failed. And so that was devastating. And then my first couple of experiences around sexuality were very guilty. We'd do it and then we'd pray and be like, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore. And so then that was definitely the beginning, is a lot of guilt. And so a lot of early classical conditioning, right? When we talk about sexual stimulus, to like guilt, shame, the forbidden, right? Stuff like that. So those are kind of the early roots of it. And then after I ended that relationship, I was like a born again virgin. That was definitely the narrative that I was going down of like, I've been saved. And then I went through a sexual assault experience after that, that pretty much radically changed everything. Once you have an experience where someone doesn't stop when you're crying, when you're saying no, it jars that whole worldview that you had of like sex in a long-term relationship of love and marriage. And so that's kind of the beginning of my journey of actually getting into therapy, which was highly forbidden in my Christian context. That was not, yeah, that was no, that's like talking to the,
What?
you need to pray to God. You need to pray to
Oh,
Jesus, not this professional
Man,
that's going to give you the liberal propaganda. Like, this is the
right.
framework I'm coming from. And so,
That's
um,
fucking insane. I'm sorry. Like
yeah,
I
I
can't
appreciate
even.
that.
I'm so sorry you went through that.
Wow.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
crazy.
It's nice to receive that now because,
Oh,
like, it's like, yeah, when you look back on it, you're like, wow. And then it's crazy to know that there are still people in that paradigm,
yeah.
Yep.
still happening. I've wanted to go back to my high school to do sex ed, and maybe one day I will, you know what I mean? But I think if they saw my bio, they'd be like, no,
Yeah.
no, no. So
You have to
yeah,
Trojan horse that, I think. You'll have to,
exactly. I'm here. I have a
yeah,
spiritual message from God.
that's right. I didn't say which God. I just said from God, right?
Exactly. The they, them God is ready to speak to them.
That's right.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So in that journey, was there like a galvanizing specific moment that started to unravel things for you?
Yeah, I think it was really the sexual assault because it's interesting now. I have an episode with Dr. Rachel Smith. She was one of my professors in my clinical training, and she has, I would say, even a worse story because her father was a pastor. So she got even more of
Mm,
this. I was just going to school that was Christian and these other sort of situations. I think it would have been radically different to have my father, even closer figure in that. But she didn't know that you could masturbate as a woman until she was in college, right? It's like super repressed. And she now leads these purity culture recovery groups. And we had this episode talking about it. And it's some of the research will say that she had quoted that people who go through purity culture often show the same symptoms of children who have experienced sexual violence, which is really
mm,
heartbreaking. And one thing that she saw again and again in her groups was how when something like that happens, people will often stay in those relationships because of the paradigm of the one and only. And that resonated with me even during the podcast recording we had done. I like felt that in my chest of how after that sexual assault experience, I was devastated. And also this paradigm of wanting to make that relationship work because God forbid I add another person that I've had sex with and the paper, like I'm tearing. So that paradigm kept me in a relationship or trying to make that work that when I look back on, I ache to know that that's what kept me there. It was like, I need to make this work because I've already had two people in my entire life. I can't have a third, so I must try to make it work with this man who completely ignored all of my needs, right? So I think that that's probably the turning point of the beginning of a pain journey that really started because I had no idea what was happening psychologically at that time, and so I started going to therapy and that kind of got me into it and starting to learn more. Um, but the non-monogamy piece comes in a little bit after that. But I think that's what started getting me interested in sex, the repression and the trauma. If I hadn't been so repressed, I don't think I would be a sex therapist, right? When it's just
well,
a
Interesting how
reality. Yeah.
interesting how that works, isn't it? Like, like you want to, it's funny because it's like one of those things where the more you repress some parts of yourselves, the more those parts want to come out, right? We talk about, homophobia, right?
Right.
Especially in men, right? I'm convinced that nobody is completely straight. Like I'm convinced of that. I think that everybody has tendencies, everybody has desires that cross gender, and I don't see. But the more homophobic somebody is, there is a potential that they are repressing some desires that they can't let out or don't feel safe to let out in any other way.
Mhm,
mhm,
mhm. Which is absolutely my story, right? I remember
Yeah.
being in college and we were doing Bible debate topics, and there was a bunch of different topics. One of them was homosexuality. You know who signed up for that topic first?
You.
you
Like at
did.
the time, I'm like, I'm a great Christian. I'm helping the world. You look back and you're like, wow, Nicole, that was a lot of passion for a topic that I
Yeah.
think comes from such deep repression. And we know that in
Right.
other areas of our lives. When you tell the kid you can't have the chocolate cookie, you can't have the cookie, you can't have the cookie. You know what they do? They get a stomach
Yeah.
ache because then they gorge, like it's not just a healthy relationship. It's that restriction that then causes even violence, especially in men, right? And what we see
Yep.
against queer folks, especially trans folks, and the way that that challenges so many people's paradigms.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Totally. So I guess moving on to the next question then, what did the transition from monogamy to non-monogamy look like for you personally? Where, I mean, I'm sure there were surprises along the way, right?
Oh, I'm still having surprises, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right.
I don't think I'm gonna
I'm
get to the
20,
end.
I'm 20 years into my journey and I'm still fucking surprised every day.
Exactly,
So I get
right?
it. Totally. Yeah.
Right. Totally. It's a beautiful journey. So grateful to be on it. The journey started for me then in like getting into a more stable, committed relationship. I had yet to explore my queerness with sobriety. I had had experiences of drunk, that's again often how it works. Talk about drugs and, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. A lot of people have drug experiences to get into more expansive states of sexuality. So that
Mhm.
often drunk gay kiss that happens, right? That was totally me. So I remember being in this committed
Me.
relationship, feeling like, damn, yeah, you're both like, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense in our society, right? So I remember like wanting to explore more of that, but being in this committed relationship. So there's definitely a bit of my queerness that was pulling me into the space of I want to explore both, but I didn't have any of the paradigms for it. And I'm in this very deep, multi-year long committed relationship and feeling so deeply in love with this man and also noticing my sex drive drop off, which I now know much more research on how in long-term monogamous relationships, women's sex drive drops drastically faster than men. So I didn't know that at the time, but I'm looking back now, seeing that in this lens. And so I started to be interested in like play parties and how could I get there? But it was so far away, so scary. Um, and then unfortunately, that multi-year long relationship, he broke up with me. I started dating some other people, having some really great sex. He comes back. I say, no, I couldn't. Meanwhile, the guy that I'm with, he tells me he's poly. I had never heard of that word,
Ah,
never heard of that word.
Mhm.
And I told him, if you loved me, it would be me and only me. And I walked out of the car.
mm.
Now, the sex was really great. So I did keep talking to him.
You
Right? We're
got
on
your
a liberation
priorities.
journey. Well,
You
I'm
got a
healing from
priority.
sexual
That's right.
trauma. And I'm like, wow, like this feels good. Like I need this in my life. So meanwhile, I still keep talking to that guy who's poly. And my ex is still trying to come back to me. And I'm talking to both at the same time. And I go, wow, here's two people I really like. Maybe this is something I could do. And that's like the beginning thought path. And then the guy who was poly ended up lying to me about other relationships and not informing the other person about me. And so that's when I said, wow, I need to start reading some books.
Mhm.
And then
What was the first book you read?
more than two.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you heard the
Yes.
scuttlebutt about more than two and its rewrite?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes. I
we
heard.
support more than two in its rewritten version.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. And so you're
Hmm.
reading books now,
Yeah,
and
reading books now and then needing a dissertation topic for my doctorate in clinical psychology. And More Than Two had a very short paragraph on relationship anarchy. And it felt very connected in the ways of if I'm going to do this and have multiple relationships, I want to honor all the people in it. I want to respect all the people in that and the multitude of ways that we could craft this in a non-hierarchical way, which I nerd out for hours on my podcast on what hierarchy means and getting into all of that. So we could go down that path. But that's the beginning of it. Even deeper is this like completely research-backed clinical psychology lens into it. And so at that point now I'm living the life in my own personal life, writing the dissertation, doing the podcast. I'm interviewing different sex educators from around the world, and also training in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which is a very ripe time for one mind to be like
wow,
digesting all of that, at one point.
Yeah. It's a lot.
amazing.
It's amazing too.
Yeah, so that's how I got here is like
I
that
think you
culmination.
I think you needed the drugs in order to be able to digest all of that.
Honestly, it's a lot of, yes, I mean, I don't disagree with you. This my psychedelic use, I deeply connect to my healing from my sexual trauma. I've had experiences, we talk about them as non-specific amplifiers, sure, of your cognitive state, but it also can be of your embodied state. I think many people know that if we quiet the monkey brain to actually feel, I've had like breath orgasms on psychedelics that is such a level of embodiment that then becomes a template for your ordinary states of consciousness, of course. But yeah, I remember being alone in my studio apartment, taking a psychedelic, and just my intention being to just feel my body. And as I was laying there naked, I kept thinking to myself, why do I still feel tension? Why am I still scared? Like, I'm in my house alone. Like, what is that? And so, such a moment to try and release and just relax and be present. So, psychedelics had a huge part in shifting some of my neuronal pathways and expansiveness around relationships, and also my reconnection to my body.
Mm.
Mm.
I
Wow.
have a question
Yeah.
for our audience. Can you define what you mean by non-specific? You've used that term a few times, so I just want to make sure that our
Yes.
audience knows what that means in your
Yes.
interpretation of it.
Totally, totally. So psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers in the sense that if you take a psychedelic and you begin to get scared, you're going to feel that at a really intense level. If you're feeling
Mhm.
happiness, you're going to feel that at a very intense level. And so we talk about them as non-specific amplifiers. Granted, each psychedelic is different, right? So something like MDMA, more of a stimulant, we have way more serotonin going on. That's going to be different than ketamine, which is what I work with legally, right, with therapy in America. That's more of a dissociative. We have more activation in the glutamate receptors. Like, they are different, but both of those states are going to amplify what you're feeling. And so I think we say that in the community as a way of not having this magic bullet for psychedelics, to think that you could just take MDMA and have this lovely fun time. You could have
Mm,
a terrible, scary, scary time depending on where your head state, is in. And so that's where we get into things like set and setting and the importance of that for your psychedelic trip, both in psychedelics and non-monogamy. I think your set and setting is what really makes or
hmm
breaks the experience.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Wow.
great. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, of course.
I want to move on to the next question, but I have a follow-up for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
Before
I'm
we,
starting to feel like we might veer off these questions here because
well,
this is really interesting. We're
it
Beautiful.
going to
is
try
super
not
interesting.
to. We're going to try not to, but
Trust your gut.
Exactly. Before we began recording, you had mentioned that polyamory is, or non-monogamy is a non-specific amplifier as well. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I think it's wild. It's just, you take the psychedelic drug of the non-specific amplifier and you feel so much, right? Think about non-monogamy. You take that drug, it is a non-specific amplifier of attachment so
Mm.
fast. So
yes.
fast. You want to
Yeah.
know if you feel secure in that relationship, take that drug and sit down. You know what I mean? It's just see where you're at. If your insecurities, they will come up. Your fears, they will come
Mhm.
up. And also your joys, when you're having in a space where you're sharing multiple lovers who are all there. I have very kitchen table experiences in my life, very grateful to have had communities where that's what I can do. It's beautiful. And I can feel so much love being surrounded by me. And then if there is a rupture in that group of people, it can feel really intense when there's a rupture across multiple different people. So I would say that, especially in our society, which is often very repressed and often puts intimacy into one relationship rather than a full community. When you start to practice non-monogamy and you have multiple intimate relationships, you're really feeling a lot more. And so it's that amplification of that, both the pain, the insecurities, and the joy and the happiness all at once.
I can
Yeah,
relate to that.
I can totally
Yeah.
relate to that. Yeah, we say that the idea of opening up to non-monogamy or polyamory will definitely show the cracks in your relationships. Like, it
Mhm.
will absolutely show the cracks in your relationship. And if you're not prepared to do the work to repair those cracks, then you're gonna have some serious surprises on your hands and a lot of stuff to
Yeah.
deal with. So
Right. And that's how we look at the therapy world, right? When you take that psychedelic, it's going to bring up those things that you might been like packing down, packing down, packing down. It
Mhm.
will bubble up, right? And so then that's where you're doing that work with that. If you're using it in a more therapeutic context, it's going to bring all of that up to be processed. And so I feel very similar when you go down the path of non-monogamy, especially because in our current paradigm, it is such a psychedelic experience, just of a paradigm shift, right? Of seeing the world in completely new ways of what's possible. And so I really think there's a lot of parallels between the two. And for me, I found so much benefit in getting clear on the set and setting of even things like jealousy, to understand that there is like a mindset piece, right? My narratives from Christianity taught me so much about how to live life. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And also, what's
Hmm.
the setting? What is the cultural context around me? Or even the partner, right? My first partner who was lying to me and lied to the other person. Wow.
Mhm.
That, of course, is going to bring up feelings of jealousy because the setting, right? And so I think often, depending on what space you're in, sometimes people feel within the non-monogamy space that we can't talk about jealousy. It makes you wrong. It's bad. It's these
Oh
other
yeah.
things. I think ideally we're in a space where that's not what we do, right? We understand it's an emotion. It's something we can get curious about, something that will
Hmm.
pass, something that is teaching us something about our internal experience. Uh, but then also taking that deeper layer, when we look at the set and setting, that's given me so much more peace with it, because I could kind of separate, like, oh, this is a part of my mindset I need to unpack. This is a part of the setting that I need to get clearer on. And often it's not just A or B, right? Typically life is A and B, you know? But
Hmm.
Mhm.
that's given me just more insight to work with this emotion that often we feel like we quote unquote can't have.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love that. Thank you that really resonates with me as somebody who specializes in emotional empowerment work and
Mm,
turning our emotions into something that can empower us in our relationships as opposed to try to sort of distance us or disconnect us from the people that we're relating with, which is often the experiences that people have in the
hmm.
world where it's like, I'm feeling this, well, don't feel that,
Yeah.
or you're feeling too much,
Mm, yeah.
Hmm.
Power of getting curious about it.
Yep. Curiosity
So,
and empathy, 100%.
so coming from the purity culture that you came from, with all of those conflicting thoughts and feelings happening while you're experiencing polyamory and enjoying it,
Yeah.
how did you reconcile those experiences in an embodied way?
Yeah,
Was it
absolutely.
through the use of psychedelics or was it other methodologies? What would you say worked for you?
A mix of all of it,
All
right?
of
I
it.
think that um, within the psychedelic community, we talk about the importance of community, right? If you, I usually say this, if you take a psychedelic with a group of hedge fund folks, they're going to say, how do we capitalize on this to make millions of dollars in America, right? That is a very different circle than like taking it and going, wow, this is a drug that has indigenous wisdom and roots, and we should make sure we honor that and also explore it within our community. Like those are two different circles. And
Mhm.
so that's going to make or break your experience of that drug, right? And so I would say that in something like non-monogamy, I found a beautiful community of folks that could hold me in that
Mhm.
experience and do it with love and kindness. And they still do this to this day. So I feel so grateful as I went through those steps, because, yeah, it was really, really tough. And we talk about with psychedelics, right? You don't need to start at the 5 gram mushroom trip. That why do that? Why? I know some people have their first time, but we can also start with a much smaller dose, like, a gram handshake dose where you establish trust and a attachment with that drug or paradigm like polyamory with more security. And so moving at the speed of trust is what we say with psychedelics. And I think the same can be said to non-monogamy, is you want to take steps of stretching, but not tearing the muscle, right? And I think
Mhm.
Mhm.
noticing like a little bit of that edge, but also not having to, definitely cried the first time I was going to go to a play party, and the thought of my partner going with someone else, I was on the floor crying. I was like, how? Why? And, bless his heart for slowing down with me and holding me during that experience. So, again, community, right?
Mhm.
And trying to take it slowly and just honoring the fact that I cried a bunch the entire way. I've been scared the entire time, realistically. And also knowing that I'm also a rock climber, so I think that kind of comes into my paradigm of this understanding of I can do risky things with the proper safety and security. So, like, good partners, good people that I love. And also, like, I can be scared and do something. Like, I can be
Mm.
scared to climb and I'm still going to go. And along the way, work with my nervous system to relax. And then I'm tremendously grateful for all of the queer feminists who have come before me. I couldn't have done this without all of them, right? Like the ethical slut, like leading the way of what is possible. People like Jessica Fern, like normalizing this so that I could stand tall in my clinical training, which I had a professor who told me non-monogamy never works. And I said, that's not what I see in my community. And I felt more like vindictive to state that because of a book like Polysecure, right? And so I absolutely credit all of the people who have come before me to illuminate this path of saying this is not only possible, but it can be radically enjoyable and pleasure filled. And then kind of working with my stress tolerance.
Wow. It's
That's
amazing.
great. Yeah, it's like it's little bits at a time, you know. You
Yes.
don't have to chew off everything. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the problems that we run into a lot with people, especially monogamous couples that are looking to open up and explore non-monogamy or polyamory, is one or the other of them is just chomping at the bit to get at it,
Yeah.
right? And then the other person is scared shitless,
Yeah.
right? And you kind of
Mhm.
go at the speed of the slowest person,
Yep.
Well, and
right?
also in doing so, I think it's on the onus is also on the person who's struggling to do the work too,
Yes.
right? And to find the supports that they need, find the information, the tools, the strategies that work for them. I know when, even despite having been in multiple polyamorous relationships, including a marriage before, when Greg and I opened up our relationship after 3.5 years, his dating caused primal panic in me.
Sure. Yep.
And he was like, should I stay home? And I'm like, no, you
Yeah.
please go, because
Yep.
my nervous system will only get better with me knowing what to do for it. And in your
Mhm.
absence is how that will work. Then when you return, it'll start to build trust, right?
Right.
Over time.
Mhm.
So recognizing that the nervous system is activated and that that's okay,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
working with yourself on self-soothing and
Yep.
regulation so that you're not dependent on the presence of that person because they might not be available when you're having these responses, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Exposure
there's two sides to
fatigue.
that same coin, right? The person going out on the date, in this
Yeah.
case, me, right? You know, I need to do that too.
Mhm.
I need to also step into that discomfort in order to be able to recognize the trust that's inherent in my relationship, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, because in my own experience, where I've tried to have relationships with someone who's kind of okay with polyamory, and I like, kind of okay, and was the problem. The ways
Mhm.
that that impacted me in the ability to go out on the date, I felt so much guilt.
Yeah.
They were kind of supportive, but you could tell didn't really want that to be our dynamic. And so when I kissed someone else, I felt horrible,
Mhm. Mhm.
horrible. And so in that moment, you start to think, this can never happen. Does this ever work? Maybe I'm not for this. But I had no idea, realizing that I needed a partner who is much more supportive, or at least doing their work and supportive, right? Because, like, absolutely support the partner that's scared. We'll hold their hands together. But being on that same plan of agenda of, like, yes, expansive relating, non monogamy, right? That makes a huge difference than someone who's like, eh, because then you come into what we talk about in feminist psychology of the relational paradox, these parts of ourselves that
Mhm.
are so deep to us but can threaten disconnection with another person, and then how we kind of navigate that. We might shut that part of ourselves off, but in doing so we disconnect from ourselves, and then we have internal struggle and shame and all of that. And that's something that happens in so many areas of life, not just non-monogamy. We're all kind of navigating that relational paradox of wanting to stay authentic to ourselves and connected. So that is so much harder to do in non-monogamy when you have someone who's not supportive. It makes it really challenging as the partner who's going out, just as much as the one who's struggling at home when you're on that date. It can be challenging in both
Mhm.
sides.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Really good point. You talk a lot about community, and you mentioned a lot about community. I'm curious to know, are there practices or specific teachers or specific tools or things that you might be able to impart that have helped you in your transition?
Absolutely. Yeah, I talk about community so much because everything that I learned in feminist psychology and relational cultural theory says that the self is always in relation. And so this self that I have has been, at minimum, this language that I'm speaking, right? I didn't create this, right? This is formed from, Anglo-Saxon, like so many people before me. So even these words that are coming out are created in community. So myself is always in relation. And so there's this deep understanding that the sense of self is always about your relationships and who you surround yourself with. And so I talk about it all the time because it's central. Often the field of psychology goes in this more individualistic focus. So I was so grateful for the feminist who started to be able to get into doctoral programs in the 70s and other stuff like that to rewrite this. thank God. And so that's always that deep focus. But you're right, like there is the individual that is experiencing all of that timeline throughout community. You're the only person who's moving in that point of time and history that experiences all those in relation moments. And so there's so much that you need to do on the internal part too. But I talk about community very strongly because you could read every book in the world, which is a form of community, right? That's a relationship to a different consciousness. But you can do all the journaling you want, but until you surround yourself with non-monogamous community, you're going to struggle. And that is just hands down what it is. And often for folks who I work with who are in rural areas, maybe it is a podcast, finding someone they can meet with online, right? That can absolutely change because those are communities. So yeah, first I would say to people, find podcasts, find books, find consciousness of other folks that you can connect with, because that will do way more work than just your internal. But within the internal, so much to do. I love journaling. I'm big into narrative therapy. Wow. Pull out a journal, blank page. What do you want to write? And the second that you start to understand that the mind is always going to have thoughts, and you can kind of take this mindfulness to take a step back and then decide what thoughts you want to write for yourself, both figuratively of your life and literally on the page. Radical time in your life to realize that level of empowerment. So I always recommend my clients to do journaling to see like, where's your thoughts going and what do you want to write in that? And so for folks who are unpacking non-monogamy, I would ask them to get, pen and paper and start writing, what are my fears and what do I want to write now? Like, what's the narrative I want to change that with? Powerful. And also embodiment practices, whatever that is for someone, whether that is running, whether that is yoga, whether that is rock climbing, whatever it is, as you are doing the psychedelic trip of non-monogamy or psychedelics in general, you're going to feel a lot in your body. Unpacking primal panic is an embodied experience. The first time I had my threesome with my two partners, the sex part, fine. But the second that he held her hand before the sex and was like rubbing her hand romantically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
that
God.
hit, didn't it?
It hit everything. I think
It's
because,
insane how
yeah,
something so small can be so impactful.
the narratives, right? So there's the
Yeah.
meaning making, right? So in my head, I was
Yep.
like, she's prettier than I am. He's gonna leave me for her. Who wants me, right? Like interesting narratives unfolding. And also, it's an embodied state, right? And so my chest is pounding, my stomach is turning. And so once we get the empowerment of knowing we can write our own narratives and also that we can work with our body. So when I take that deep breath, I'm activating my parasympathetic nervous system, I'm slowing down. And when we're activated in that primal panic, right, we are in our fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We have moved into the amygdala, the part of the brain that is very primal and is not the prefrontal cortex, like executive functioning skills. And so the
Yep.
more that I can realize, like, okay, if I take this deep breath, I'm going to calm my body, get back to my prefrontal cortex, and now I'm going to write the story that I want to write is that I'm secure in this relationship. Both of them love me. They're not going to leave me, right? And then also bouncing that off again with community, because you really need that secure relationship to actually like get that security with time. So there's so much that we can do, both like internal narratives and embody work, that I think is really crucial.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. And that's
Yeah.
right. And I mean, it's interesting as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, holy shit, there's so much alignment in our experience
Yeah.
and my
Yeah.
experience specifically with what you're saying. And,
Sure.
the journaling and, I'm learning about neuro linguistic programming right now,
Sure.
which is essentially changing the way that you're jumping the track is what I like to call it, jumping the track from one narrative to another and, being aware and mindful about, hey, look, I don't really want to think about this. I want to think about this instead, right? So I think
Right.
it's great. It's fantastic. Thank you for
Totally.
sharing all that.
I
And
think there's something
yeah.
really neat that came up for me while you were talking too, is that there's that when you're saying, I have this narrative that I'm experiencing, the negative narrative, and
Mhm.
then there's another narrative that I want instead
Right.
of that. We can make that jump on the track, as you said, Greg. And also, we can still love that part of ourselves that
Yes.
has the negative narrative, that is
Yes.
Yep.
in struggle. We
Yep.
can recognize the parts work
Mhm.
that's
Right.
included in that, right? And attend to that that part of us that is really not okay.
Yeah.
And there's that like multi-layeredness to the journaling experience if you're doing it mindfully. I think a lot of people use it as a place to vent, and that's great,
Sure.
but there's more that we can do with
Yes.
that. Yeah.
That next level of writing the narrative,
Yeah,
not just like
absolutely.
releasing, but like the empowerment to create it. IFS is so, so important. We talk a ton about that in psychedelics, right? So here's again, so I would talk about the monogamous parts of me, you know, the part of me that I would go to play parties and see it's fascinating. I would be at a play party with my multiple partners, but I'd see another set of people doing that and I'd be judging them.
What the fuck?
Oh,
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, wait, I'm here with my multiple people, but I am judging you. I'm like, gross. Like, how are you doing? Like, it's like, what? It's just spinning. Yes. And so there's so much in there. And so I'd say,
It's
like, okay,
crazy.
my monogamous part is having a reaction, right? And so that gives me some space from it. And I could kind of like not have to be attached to it. And I could, IFS would talk about putting those parts in dialogue. So I would have my monogamous part talk to my non-monogamous part, and have them have a dialogue with compassion and kindness.
That's right.
Because I think that's also a really big key to this is having compassion for yourself. Because I will tell you the amount of times that I was writing the dissertation, I was reading the books, I'm recording with Jessica Fern, I'm like right there, and you're thinking like, cool, I'm doing this. And then my body would react. And it would be so frustrating. So frustrating. A lot like my rock climbing practice. Like I'm lead climbing outdoors. I want to do this. And my body is reacting because of monkey brain fear. And in our society with non-monogamy, it's not the paradigm that we grew up in. I don't consider that monkey brain because when we actually look at monkeys, hold on a second, they're
That's
very
right.
non-monogamous, right? So it's not just monkey brain for non-monogamy. I would say that's the years of classical conditioning, all of the years that we have been said, if you fall in love with the second person, leave the first because you never loved them, this like
Right. Black.
yes, exactly. And so there's so much to that to unpack. And so you have to have compassion for yourself when you're unpacking any system of oppression and to understand that that is deep in our unconscious because it's the fish, we're the fish in the water of that. And then also, taking even more of a historical lens to this has been so helpful. And not even, maybe I'll pause there before I get into the history, but currently there are cultures around the world that do not start out any practice of monogamy, and so they're much more, I don't think we'd even put them into the word non-monogamy because that's like a using the colonizer narrative of monogamy to define another cultural group, right? So they do expansive relating where there's not any forms of restriction like that, and that's currently happening in different areas around the world. And so they don't grow up with the same sort of unlearning that we have to do, let alone the history then to understand of when monogamy became more popular, with the privatization of land and wanting to pass down and under capitalism, right? And then even how that wasn't even expected for men. Often men had this expectation that they could go out and about, right? And then we see in the 1970s women start to cheat as much, if not even more, than men once we have financial independence, right? Like the more you get into the history of all this, it does provide more, I think, nervous system attunement because you start to realize, wow, I've been sold something, and this reaction that I have is not a reflection of my lack of ability, but more so a lack of the current setting that I'm in. When you grew up with Dare and Reagan, and then you try to take a psychedelic, and the whole time you're worrying that someone's going to come take you to jail, how are you supposed to have a good trip? Yeah, yeah.
That's
How
me.
are you supposed to have a good trip, right? So I think if we take that lens to non-monogamy, it's not that something's wrong with you. It's the lens of the training, the education, especially like me in purity culture, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I just want to acknowledge something.
yeah.
IFS, that term that you used, it stands for internal family systems. So for the listeners out there, the watchers out there, that's what IFS means, internal family systems, often referred to short term as parts work.
Yeah.
So just wanted to put that out there.
When you're working with your clients, what is the top one or two struggles that you find most people are encountering?
Primal panic, shame, lack of trust,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Especially in our society around sex, the shame, immense, immense. And so people feeling guilt to be able to experience that with multiple people doubting themselves, like I was saying earlier, when I had that panic with my first sort of expansive multi-person sexual experience. I can't do this. This will never work. Who am I to think that I could ever do this? Something's wrong with me, right? That internal narrative that starts so fast. And so helping people to see more of the context that they're in so that they can have that self-compassion, take accountability for it, change it, but to have that self-compassion, it makes it much more malleable rather than this negative self-internal dialogue, which gets you nowhere other than just a deeper hole into pain, right? So it's taking that cultural context, having the compassion, finding the community, and then the bravery to keep stretching at the speed of trust. And so I think I see a lot of people who, particularly because of my background, I get clients who often come from purity culture and want someone who has walked that same path to like support them in that, because it is radically challenging to undo a lot of those narratives for love and relationships.
Where are you in the
Wow.
world?
Chicago.
Chicago. Okay.
Thank God, my queer mecca, right? Like, the bigger the city, the more the queers we can find.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just good to
No.
know for anyone who might be interested in reaching out to you for work with that. Right?
Yeah, and I do coaching with clients from around the world. So I could do coaching with anybody. If they're
Awesome.
wanting to do in-person ketamine work, yeah, that is only in Chicago because we do that in person. And so, yeah, if people wanted to fly out, they could come and do that, and we could definitely have that sort of experience.
Nice.
Great.
And what's the difference between those two for you? Coaching,
Oh, what a
coaching and
fun.
then in person.
Who am I answering this to? You know what I mean? Like, who am I answering it to is a good question. My understanding of the difference, like legally, is the sense that therapy is a space where we provide a diagnosis and a treatment plan. I'm very anti-DSM for a multitude of reasons that we could have a whole long podcast on, right? And so they are very similar, I think, in the skills that I have to provide to someone. But when I'm coaching, I do not do a diagnosis and I do not do a treatment plan. And I also do not prefer to do that in therapy when possible.
Mm-hmm.
But to
You said
insurance,
DSM? That's
diagnostic
diagnostics.
statistical manual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yay.
Five. We're up to 5 revisions in how many years? Jesus Christ. Anyway,
Yes.
sorry, don't get me started on that. Okay. All right. So so how do talking about psychedelics specifically, um you've mentioned a lot about this already, so this might be a little redundant, but I think there's a little bit more space to talk about it, in particular about how do psychedelics support the work of healing like relational trauma, and then also specifically erotic freedom. I think that's something you haven't really touched on just yet.
Yeah. So relational trauma, well, yeah, we could talk about this for years. What a fun space. The first thing that is coming to mind for me is the non-specific amplifier, right? So if you have trauma with relationships, you're going to feel it more. So when I'm doing that as a psychotherapist in therapy, right, we have to talk about attachment. This is someone I'm getting to know in a therapeutic context. We have 3 sessions beforehand. We're going to go into this experience, and we do invite people to go inward, but they're still going to have feelings about me as the therapist. And so we have to get really clear on that. Can you communicate with me if you need help? Can you communicate with me if you're feeling upset, angry, scared, all of that, because it's going to be heightened. And so for people who have been repressing a lot of that, it's going to come up. And think about the society that we live in, where we hear massive atrocities on a daily scale, and you're expected to show up at work. And the DSM, to get back into that, has something called prolonged grief disorder, because I, in the box of therapy, am supposed to diagnose you to say that you have a problem if you've been grieving for too long. So talk about a world where relationally we are often disconnected from actually what is feeling. Because if we felt all of that, I think we'd all need to take more than just a Monday off from work, from what we see happening in the world right now.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to, the more we take that and feel more, you're going to start caring more, being more connected, and or processing the things that have made connection scary, because there are so many of us who have had trauma experiences, right, with different genders specifically. And so if you have that, it's going to bring that up to be processed, ideally in a safe container, so that then connection can feel good again. We are always trying to keep ourselves safe. The people that are hurting other people are so deeply inside hurt. And so when a connection, when someone is anti-connection, it's because there's some sort of experience in the past where connection has led to hurt. And now we're trying to keep
Mhm.
ourselves safe. And so psychedelics can bring all of that up. And it can also amplify things like play, right? When you're in, again, non-specific amplifiers. So from trauma all the way to pleasure and play, right? It can bring out these more childlike parts of yourself. You're having neuronal plasticity. You're making new connections. Your brain is firing in novel ways. And so that can bring some bit of looseness that some people forget to lose connection, or we lose connection to. And so there's that full range there of like healing trauma and attachment to like play and pleasure and feeling loose in your body, and letting go of some of these shame things that felt very restrictive and keep people in their bodies in tight ways.
Mhm.
Mm,
That's great. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you for such a detailed explanation of that. Yeah, that there's a lot in there that resonates with me. And like you said, I could talk about this shit for years too. So I'm
Yes.
gonna, yeah.
Absolutely. And I
We
We'll
mean,
don't have
have you back,
I don't think
Nicole. We'll
yeah,
have
I
you
don't think
back.
there's
okay.
literally enough time in the world to be able to
Yeah.
discuss all the
Absolutely.
stuff that I want to discuss and
Right.
relation to all of this. So
And
it's
that's
Mhm.
why
incredible.
I like relationship anarchy. My dissertation on that, it's about dismantling the power structures that are impacting our relationships at its core
Mhm.
is relationship anarchy. And so we could get into the power structures that are impacting our relationships like we just did, right? You can't grieve on Monday because you got to go to work. So there's a numbing that we're all doing to survive under this current context. How is
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
impacting our abilities to love? Right? That's
Mhm.
huge right there. Even our relationship to drugs, dare, Reagan, right? Those are power structures. Like I see relationship anarchy not just as, relationships to humans, it's relationships generally, whether that's other humans, the relational, the world at large with climate change, right? Other
Mhm.
animals, spirituality, which we could definitely get in, like we started with, the power
Mhm.
structures of religion that impacted
Mm,
me and my ability to relate, right? So I see relationship anarchy as deconstructing all of those different relationships to try and create more liberation for us. So,
Mhm.
and I think at the end of my career, there's like two big things I'm really focusing on right now in my life. I would love to end rape culture.
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah. Or at
Yeah.
least put
mhm.
a hell of a dent in it while I'm alive.
Mhm.
And I would like to invite the world to reflect on the fact that we already have multiple relationships. Every single person in this world
Yep.
does.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
If we had that frame
Absolutely.
shift, what a different world would it be?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I love the way you present yourself. I love the way I just, yeah, I wish I could hug you right now, but that's
Oh,
amazing
thanks.
with
Yeah.
consent, of course. But I
Yes,
mean,
of
like,
course.
like I love the way you present yourself and you kind of make those points, right? Like, with
Mhm.
the rape culture and with, you're right. Like we have multiple relationships already, right? It's everywhere in our life except in our intimate relationships. And I still have yet to have somebody tell me why the fuck that's necessary. But anyway, that's my frustration.
And it's fair and it's
Mhm.
valid and it's important because look at the way we structure the world. Look at the way we structure the
Yeah.
world, often dyadic relating, which is not necessarily a problem. I'm not anti monogamy. I am pro community. So I don't care
Hmm.
as a relationship anarchist if you're having sexual fidelity and having sex with one person. I don't care if you're celibate. I don't care if you're asexual. What I care about is do you look around at all of the people you're connected to and give a fuck about them, right?
Right.
And when you
Yeah.
Right.
do, you share your resources. We have mutual aid. And that is a very different world. Currently, our intimacy and care is often in this dyadic relating and the passing down of that generation. That's what I think we need
Well,
to change is to care more about our whole communities, which is why I'm so passionate about something like relationship anarchy because it encompasses sexual fidelity and monogamy. It encompasses polyamory, all under this umbrella of community. And how do we dismantle the structures of power that have disconnected us from that ability to relate and care about one another? Oh, yeah, I see a radically different world if we started caring at that level. And that's the joy of the anarchist is to try and see that different world of what could happen. How do we get there?
right.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes down to a lot of people would lose a lot of power if that happened, and they're
Yes.
not willing to do that.
including
Yeah.
us. That's, I think, one of the hardest things to sit in America. We sit at the top too compared to other countries, and many of us do not want to lose yeah, a lot of the ease that we have in our lives while other countries are suffering at that. So I think it's really tough to sit with that in terms of what our revolution will really look like if we were to actually provide this level of amenities to everyone in the world. I don't think our climate could actually account for that level of
Mhm.
right ease. And so there's so much for us to sit with that I obviously have hard times
Mhm.
to sleep at night, right? When you sit with all that, you're just like, damn.
Yeah. Oh, for
Yeah,
sure.
so
Yeah.
compartmentalize.
Yeah,
Put
one
it
step at a
away, put it
time.
away.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
I work on my corner, which is sex and relationships. And I think that there is so much to do there. So many people are interested in this. So many people are hurting, rates of trauma. And so it's my corner of the thread that I'm working on. And my family is still Mormon, right? So I'm still very connected to the proximity of those beliefs, which is always a good dose of perspective because now I run in a pretty queer poly community where all of my friends and lovers are all, poly with kids, poly with this, right? And so I kind of forget, and then I'll call up my mom and be like, oh, right. So it's an important touch to remember the perspectives and kind of the beginning of my journey of why I became so passionate about this and the work that there still is to do in the world.
So, just to touch on the queer part of this,
Yeah.
how do you think queer frameworks help to dismantle those dominant narratives, even for people who aren't queer?
Hmm. Well, the queer community has had a big emphasis on community from the beginning
Mhm.
because of the ostracization that we experienced from a lot of our nuclear families, right? And so the
Mhm.
even the relationship anarchy movement and this big queer movement has a lot to honor from queer folks, asexual folks, people who are rewriting these narratives. And so queer individuals have been rewriting family and connection from the beginning, right? And so they have been relating in more expansive ways. And queer folks have also taken the lenses of systemic oppression. And so when you go back to that lineage, we can understand that, yes, there's so many systems that are restricting our ability to express freely. And so mononormativity is one, just like homophobia, right? And so there are these systems, and I really appreciate the lens of queerness, which talked about internalized homophobia, that I, as a queer person, have this whole internalized journey of being anti-queer. So if you
Mhm.
apply that to non-monogamy, right? Like there's internalized mononormativity. And so
Yeah.
my monogamous part that was judging other couples while trying to practice it like myself, right? So we don't have to beat ourselves up for the internalized homophobia, the internalized mononormativity. We work through that. And the
Mhm.
best way to do that is to have compassion for yourself and know where it's
Mhm.
coming from, and then find communities where you can do healing work to transform that. So I think the queer movement has done so much to create space for us to think about expansive ways of relating, of dismantling the systems. And so yeah, queer folks have really been like setting the agenda for this, and it's absolutely queer to be having multiple relationships.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get a little provocative for a minute, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I love provocative. Let's go.
So one of the things that I notice in the non-monogamous community is a lot of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
There's a ton of gatekeeping in non-monogamous, specifically polyamorous communities. And in my experience with queer communities as well, there's a lot of gatekeeping in certain subcultures of queer communities. So the question is like you were talking about walking into a play space and
Hmm.
that mono part of you coming out and judging that person, right?
Yep.
And so for me, as somebody who identifies as bisexual, it's like I'm gay, but I'm not that gay,
Mm.
right? What's your take on that? Like what's your take on the gatekeeping part of community? Because it is a part of it. It's like you have to be this certain way. That's been my experience, frankly, with relationship anarchists as well.
Yeah.
Is
Oh,
they
oh,
come in,
yeah.
yeah, is they come in
Amen.
and they want to dismantle everything that's not what they believe. And I think that's problematic.
Yeah, I remember telling one of my friends, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have this play scene, and I'm thinking about having a circle of people who I trust and love that would touch me and some other people that I would be comfortable with to watch. And they're like, that sounds like hierarchy. I was like,
Sounds like boundaries to
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, if this is your form of hierarchy, then like, yeah, I practice hierarchy. Like, yeah, there are some people
Yeah.
I feel really comfortable with and others that I do not. But I hear
Yeah.
you. And like some people getting very vitriolic and being like, no, you could
Mhm.
not. I'm
Everybody
like,
has to be able to touch you. It's like, no, no.
I was shocked. And I was like, I will remember this. This is going in my future memoir one day, you know, like
Yeah.
for sure in the book on the discussion of hierarchy.
Oh,
Right.
for
That's not
sure.
hierarchy. That's yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's
ridiculous.
boundaries.
What but that is the level of gatekeeping I think that
Yes.
can happen, right? It's
Mhm.
like and then when you're talking about being specifically being queer, whatever that means to you or for you, you know, it's such a nuanced eh, thing and
Yeah.
you can't gatekeep that. You can't
Right.
say no, you're not queer enough, or no,
Right.
you know, you're too queer, right? You know, it's
Yeah.
like when I see a gay man who is very flamboyant, right? I have a tendency to judge,
Yeah.
right? But I recognize that I'm judging that person partly because I'm jealous of them,
Sure.
and partly because I am afraid of them because of
Mhm.
their level of freedom, because of their level
Right.
of desire to want to be that flamboyant, right?
Yeah.
I admire that. And it, you know, and I'm like, but gatekeeping would say, no, you can't be that way. That's wrong. You can't do that, right? And on the same other end of the spectrum, right? If somebody has never had an experience that's been queer or bi or same gendered, but they still want to identify that way, well, what the fuck is the harm in doing that?
Mhm, mhm.
Right. So I'm
Mm.
curious to know, that's the kind of the provocative part is
Yeah, of
like,
course.
you know, being a relationship anarchist, identifying with that term, but then also being so aware that there's so much gatekeeping in there.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've heard some relationship anarchists say that you can't practice monogamy and be a relationship anarchist. Part of the relationship anarchy values is making sure that sex is not the highest form of intimacy and the center of your
Right.
life. And so for you to look at another person and be like, because you don't have sex with multiple people, you're not a part of us, is really prioritizing that as the highest form of. So I'm like, I don't think you see, but that's, you know, and
Let's see
so,
the irony that's inherent in what you're doing here.
right.
Right.
Mhm.
And usually, what I say is that if there's any sort of boundary on the gate of relationship anarchy, in my opinion, which is not the definitive opinion, but in my opinion, it's this question of community. If you're not prioritizing community, I'd say maybe you're more of a relationship libertarianist, right? Like there are other words that maybe would be a little bit more fitting than that. And then I think this question about gatekeeping often comes from spaces of pain when we really think about it, right? Is
Yes.
that sometimes we will say like, oh, I don't want to be with someone who's bi-curious. I don't want to be with someone who's poly-curious. And that is because as someone who has even tried that myself, you can get slapped in the face with
Hmm.
just painful things when you attach to someone who's new and learning. And so I think that it comes from the space of protection. And so when we think about marginalized communities like the queer community, polyamorous, relationship anarchists, anyone in expansive relating, we've been so deeply hurt and are currently still being hurt.
Yeah.
You know, I like was just walking around here and we were in a coffee shop with people reading the Bible and I'm like scared to kiss my partner who's a femme because I'm like,
Mhm. Mhm.
so it's still happening all the time, right? And so it makes sense that then we would have this protection of like, you can't be in here because you might hurt us or judge us. Now, also, what do we do to the fact that I myself was someone who was condemning homosexuals?
Yep.
Now,
Mhm.
granted, I would absolutely understand that I would not have been invited to the spaces that I'm currently in given my actions, because that wouldn't be
Mhm.
safe for the community spaces I have. And also, how do we look at
How do
that
we, yeah,
transformation? How do we hold that
Right.
restorative
that's the
justice?
paradox, right?
When we are gatekeeping so strongly that we're keeping those who are learning away from guidance and
Right,
community,
right,
we're harming our own community
right.
because they need to be part of what's going on around them to understand it better, to get
Yeah.
clarity for themselves, to understand themselves better in relationship to it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there needs to be a safe space there for them to be able to step in and recognize that maybe some of the things that they are seeing or thinking or experiencing might not be, you know, an exact match for the way they want to move through the world,
Hmm.
right? But the only way you can do that is to share that, right? Like you said, with community, within community, right?
Yeah.
It happens a lot more, I think, online than it does in person, People are much more emboldened online than they are in person.
Comments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
comments, Jesus Christ. Anyway,
Yeah.
don't get me started. But I did want to circle back and say something. I really like the fact that you were saying that that a lot of times sex is the prioritization in the relationship.
Hmm.
I want to share just a really brief story with you about that because I think it's very relevant here. But
Yeah.
you're familiar with the term friends with benefits, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I hate that term.
Me too.
I hate it. The reason I hate it is quite simple, though. It's because every friendship that you have has benefits.
Right.
And friends with benefits implies somehow that sex is the most important benefit. So therefore, we're going to take this benefit and we're going to create a term that implies that sex now becomes. I have amazing friendships with people that are incredibly intimate and
Okay.
non-sexual and non-romantic,
Yep.
and they're just as important to me
Yep.
as anything that I might want to have experienced sexually. Right. And so I don't like the term friends with benefits. I kind of want to make it my life's journey to kind of get people to stop saying it, but good
Yeah.
luck with that. Who cares?
Yeah. Welcome to the relationship anarchist circles. They're definitely having that conversation for you.
Yeah. 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 So anyway, so yeah, I call them intimate friendships. That's what they
Yeah,
are. Right.
absolutely.
As a way of defining the difference between a friendship and a friendship that has any sort of romantic slant to it or
Right, right. And so, yeah, the relationship anarchy community, there's a handful of folks who don't use labels at all because of stuff like this and will say
Hmm.
it's annoying.
everybody is a friend. And at first, what'd you say?
That's my outside voice. I said, "Oh, that's annoying. I can't. I
Mm,
need labels. I need structure. I need that. I can't not do that." Anyway, I digress.
sure. And that's totally okay. I think that's the important part about relationship anarchy is that there's not a definitive way to do it. So if someone comes to you and says, "You're not
Thank
doing
you.
this because you're not,"
Yes.
it's like,
Okay, slow your roll there. You know,
exactly. There's the power structure.
yeah,
So I think
right.
that's great that you know that. And I too like labels. I feel like I I will have friends that I have sex with. I will have friends that I don't have sex with, and that word can be used interchangeably. It's just not such a strong definer of a box. I can have partners that I never have sex with, lovers that I never have
Mhm.
sex with, right? And so for me, I like the labels as an opportunity to come together and define that of what does this word mean for the two of us? If we use the
Right.
word friend, what are we
Yes.
attaching to
Yes.
that? And so I think that that's
Right.
important. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to if you want to not use the word partner and you want to say the word friend, it's fascinating how that often changes our assumptions. When I say partner, I might have this assumption that you text me back at a certain frequency, that you show up at my
Mhm.
birthday, that you prioritize me over your friends, right? And so it's interesting as a reflective practice when you take those labels off or create new ones, right? Like intimate
Yeah.
relationships, how that creates more space to deconstruct things like the relationship escalator and the intimacy escalator, which we haven't talked about, but to rewrite new narratives of what is possible in those connections.
Yeah, for sure,
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah, and that's yeah. I labels are only as good as they're only as good as as much as they serve you,
Right,
right? And so if it's not
exactly.
serving you, then it's not a good label for you. So this has been incredible, right? This has
Yeah,
been an incredible experience. I like you've said and I've said we could sit here and talk about this for hours,
yes,
days,
I love
years,
it. Yeah,
eons. Unfortunately, time is finite. So we kind of want to wrap it up and what we'd like to do when we wrap it up is, where can people find you? Talk a little bit about your book. You mentioned it
yeah,
earlier at the
yeah,
beginning. So talk a
yeah,
little bit about that, how they can find
right.
you, how they can get a hold of you, work with you,
Yeah.
etc.
Well, hello, everybody. It's so great to have had this conversation with all of you. You can find me at modernanarchypodcast.com. My show, I release an episode every Wednesday, and it's available on all podcast players. And then on my website, the Psychedelic Jealousy Guide is available for free for folks to download as a PDF. I also have my dissertation, my full almost 200 pages of content for free to download there. I also have reflection questions that I do with my partners there for free to download. So I post a lot of stuff on there. Despite my immense amount of student loans that I have, I feel like my lens as a therapist gives me a big focus on sharing resources and providing free education because that's how we're going to dismantle rape culture is we need to provide education on these topics. And so all of that is available on my website at modernanarchypodcast.com. And it's been such a joy to connect with you both and to be able to talk to your listeners. And I hope that they can keep following their pleasure wherever that leads them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. What a delight to meet you. Oh my
I
goodness.
know, insane. This has been amazing.
So
This has
much
been
fun.
absolutely
Thank
amazing.
you.
Thank you so much. I might have a new best friend.
Yeah, I'm
And remember,
Choose love.
and keep it kind.
Beautiful.
We'd love to hear your comments, questions, or topic suggestions. Don't forget to subscribe.
And you're invited to join our Facebook group, Empowered Poly Relationship Support.
You can reach out to us on our websites, greggmillion.com
LeanneMillion.com,
and empoweredpoly.ca,
where you can check out our courses
and find more information.
and follow us on our socials.
Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Yeah, nobody's going to listen to this anyway.
Why did we even bother?
Right?